So welcome back. In the last lesson, you went over JavaScript functions and then methods, and then in this lesson, we're going to talk about JavaScript objects. So all JavaScript objects is you want to think about encapsulating a bunch of keys and values inside of, well, a JavaScript object. So if you're looking at coding this thing, you're going to write it a little differently. You're not going to write it as like a typical function. You're going to just write it as something called object literal. So what I'll do now is I'll show you what an object literal looks like, how to code it, and how you understand these key value pairs. You're also going to have to understand that certain things are going to change, right? So, you know, I think functions now become methods, and then parameters. Well, why don't we just code it, and then you can just take a look at it, and when you see the syntax of a literal object or object literal, then it'll give you a better understanding of how this entire thing works. So why don't you take a look at my screen now, and if you look at this object, we're going to call this one pres. So we'll say var pres, and then it's written typically like with just must aspirations, but you notice there's no parentheses around it, so there's no it's not a function, it's an object. So we have this object called pres, and then we have these key value pairs. So look inside of the f name and l name, and you'll see that those are the keys. So f name would be the key, and then the value of the key would be Andrew, and then we have another key called l name, and then the value for that key is Yang. And then you notice after each and every key value pair there's a comma. So you can tell when they're separated because I'm using the colon. So the key is on the left and the value is on the right. And you can do more than just simply strings. You can also do integers, and again, the age is set to 45 as an integer. Notice that there's no comma after the 45. It is to tell the computer that that's it. That is the end of your literal object. That is the last line. So this is your object. If you wanted to call it, well, you can do a console log or you can do a window alert. And when you do this window alert, you say the name of the object and then the dot notation, so that dot right there, and then what you want to return as the value. So in this one, we're saying pres.fname. Well, if you actually did the window alert, your result's going to come up as Andrew. It's not going to come up as anything else. So you can call that as well. So let's look at the explanation. You created an object called pres, you created keys and values, and then you coded a way to show the values of the keys of the object. So here's why creating objects are important. Because sometimes you want to build something where the data set is so large, you want to encapsulate it into one thing. So instead of creating like a million different variables for something, it might just be easier to build an object and then call from that object or place values in that object. So that's a better way to experiment with something, especially when you're working with a large data set, is create one object. For example, a car has so many different parts and components, you don't have like thousands of variables and just lay it out on the paper, right? You actually want to wrap all that up into one unit. And I think that's why having an object is so important. So why don't we talk about how to update an object? So we can use dot notation or square brackets to update the object. For example, we can call the object by its name, followed by the dot notation, and then we can say it'll equal something else. So we can do it this way. Let's say we want to change the name of our president candidate. We could say pres.fname equals, and then you know what, put your name in there. You'll be president someday. So there's two ways of calling something from your object. You could just say the object.fname or whatever so you call the object and then you call the key and it returns the value. But you can also call it by the name of the object, and then you can do square braces and the quotes around it. And the reason you would do something like that is, well, if you did that, you would want to do that if you're calling the name of a property as a number. Technically, you can do it, but you should really try to avoid doing that. But you would also use this method is if a variable is being used in place of a property name. So why don't we talk about object constructors? And an object constructor is similar to the object literal, except that in this time we're going to create a variable, and in this example we're going to build a hotel. So we'll say var hotel equals, and then we say new object. You have to use new object. You have to say that the word keyword is new. And then you want to assign these values. So we say hotel.name equals, and then whatever the hotel name is. And then availability, because those are available rooms. And then we can say, you know, how many of those rooms are actually used. So all you have to do is just assign these values. You call the object, use the dot notation, and then you call the key, or you create the key, and then you just make it equal a value. So now you've had some experience building that object. So let me give you some practice. One, why don't you try to build an object that's, let's say, a hamburger, right? So a hamburger has different components. Build a hamburger object and then allow the user to replace the name of your hamburger, or allow yourself to change the price of that hamburger. You know, these are good examples that you should be able to code. And if you can code that, then the rest of it's going to be really easy, right? So building a hotel, all it really is the name of a hotel and available rooms and what's taken. So why don't you just maybe build a hotel, and then for every person that checks in, you know, make a button that says add 1, -1. So you remove a room that's available, and then you add a room that's available. Why don't you try that? All right. If you have any questions, just leave comments below. I'll answer them as soon as I can. And if not, I'll see you in the next lesson. All right? Bye.